Redditors assemble. r/AskReddit. Cops of Reddit. What has so far been the creepiest call you've ever had to respond to, and what happened? I responded to a report of an unresponsive infant. When I arrived, all the family members were standing around casually in the front yard pointing into the house. I found the baby in the back room laying on her back on a bare mattress. I started CPR, but realized the baby was probably already deceased. We rushed her out to the arriving ambulance hoping they had a way to bring her back. I learned she was the mother's second suspicious SIDS death, and I had her other children removed from her care. The difficult part was when I left the scene and went to the ER to see what came of the situation. As I walked in and asked where she was, an ER nurse walked over to me and handed me the deceased baby swaddled in a blanket and told me to wait for someone to show me to the morgue. So I'm standing there in the ER in uniform holding what everyone thinks is a live infant, but rather, an infant corpse, and several people stopped by wanting to see her and commenting on how cute it is to see an officer holding a baby. I just smiled, but it killed me inside. I was ushered back to the morgue after what felt like an eternity, and told I had to wait with the baby until the medical examiner arrived. They took the blankets off and laid her on a stainless steel gurney and left me alone with her again. I lounged around the morgue for about an hour waiting. By the time I got home several hours after the end of my shift, because this call came out 15 minutes before the end of my 10-hour shift, I lay down on my bed and cried for a long time. My young daughter was in daycare, and my wife at work. I really needed to hold both of them, so the house felt incredibly empty. My daughter was only slightly older than the infant, and when I was looking at her earlier, I kept seeing my own daughter. I didn't get any sleep at all before going back in for the next shift later that night. As someone who's worked at a cemetery, burying a baby was my cracking point. I didn't last long after that. I only worked there as a landscaper, very small town. I was me and the funeral home owner who worked a 1,000+ plot cemetery. When my boss hopped down into the grave and very casually asked me to hand him the casket, which was barely bigger than a microwave, I did so with the image of it being my 2-year-old son. A week later I quit. He understood and we are still friends today. I feel ya, and thank you for the job you do that most will never see. My cousin is a cop and he responded to a call on Valentine's Day night. A 12-year-old girl called in to say her mother had blown her brains out in the living room. I guess her and her brother were getting ready for dinner and the mom just shot herself. He said the creepy thing about it was dinner all set up, drinks on the table, and suddenly she shot herself. Kids were sitting outside when he arrived. To this day I can't imagine Valentine's Day for them, but I know that is something that stuck with him seeing that. Suicide is a strange thing. My grandpa was helping my cousin work on her school project. He got up for a glass of water and dropped the glass in the sink where it broke. He then proceeded to get her stuff up and take her down the street to our aunt's house, dropped her off while acting completely fine, drove back home and shot himself in his bedroom. I agree with this. The day that my boyfriend committed suicide happened fairly similar to that. We both got up that morning. He had taken the day off work, which I didn't think was that odd really. He had worked nearly 2 weeks straight with no day off. I honestly figured he just needed a break. He sat in the bathroom with me while I did my makeup, got ready. We talked just like everything was normal. He kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me and I never saw him alive again. We texted throughout the morning. The last text I have from him was at 11:53. I just assumed he had gone back to sleep. However, when I got home around 4, he had been dead 4 hours. Holy shit, that is one hell of a blindside. I was suicidal last year and I tried to tell my girlfriend most of what I was going through. Even though I knew it hurt her a lot, I didn't want to make up my mind one day and have it hit her out of the blue. On a positive note, I've never been happier in my life than I am right now and we have a vacation planned early next month. It was a stormy night on the Oregon coast. A lady was driving drunk and ran into the back of a parked school bus. When she did, her car caught on fire, but she was able to escape. When I found her slowly walking down a side street, I was telling her to stop and turn around. When she turned around, her lower jaw was gone, and she was totally dazed. Her tongue was sticking straight out the top of her neck, and she was trying to talk. She ended up surviving, but needed tons of plastic surgery. Yikes, this one is awful and would have been so creepy to see in person. The other day there was a thread about things you've seen that no one will believe. Someone said they saw a person on the side of the road with no lower jaw. I was like, yeah right, but it seems a lot more plausible now. Link please. It's simultaneously too late and just late enough for this shit. Working third shift on Halloween night. I'm out by one of our smaller lakes just outside the city limits. Kids love to go out and drink, which is surrounded by some very nice houses. Going through the neighborhood, each of the roads ends at a small 2-lane road that surrounds the lake. I'm slowing to the stop sign and already starting to look to my right to make the turn when my headlights start tracing the rock wall that surrounds the lake. I catch something out of the corner of my eye in one of the large trees that dots the walk path. I back up to see what it was and I see a guy hanging. At first I thought it was a Halloween decoration. The neighborhood is really into decorating for every holiday. So I stop, get out, and as soon as my flashlight hits him I realize, nope, no decoration, he dead. As I'm standing there getting ready to call it in, I notice a gaggle of kids coming down the street trick-or-treating shit. As soon as they see my car they start heading my way faster, so I book it back up the block to meet the parent walking with them and tell her she needs to take the long way around the block the other way. She can see it on my face, I'm not kidding. Turns out he was a 20-year-old that was devastated about his girlfriend breaking up with him, and she lived in the last house on that block where she would see him the next morning when she looked out her window. Okay, that ending. What the frick? That's a broken, hopeless, but vindictive mindset. She hurt me so much, I want it to end, and I want her to see how much it hurt. I have to admit, I flirted with that type of thinking before. It's scary, scary shit. My best friend hung himself after a fight with his wife, put the rope around his neck and then bashed his head into the stone wall of their bedroom until he knocked himself unconscious and he hung on his body weight. He was supposed to go to work after that fight, but he didn't. She did though. They worked at different restaurants across the street from each other. He didn't show up for work, so she called home to her 13-year-old daughter, his stepdaughter, who just gotten home from school at that time, to go wake him up. Bedroom door was locked, so wife had daughter jimmy the door with a knife, and that's when wife heard a scream. She tells me she knew immediately. Wife runs home to find my friend still hanging and her daughter freaking out. In the movies and TV, they typically show hanging as much less gruesome than it really is. His was especially gruesome. The rest is history from there. My friend knew the family's schedule. It was inevitable that his stepdaughter would be the one to find him. That was the one thing he could do to hurt his wife the most, traumatize her daughter. Wife and I have remained very close friends, and I'm pretty close with her daughter as well. They're like family to me by virtue of being my best friend's family, a friend that I considered a brother. That whole thing fricked them both up real bad for a while. Her daughter the most, me too, but the least of us. They're both doing much better now, though, and, despite what he did, the three of us have forgiven him and still love him. But yes, broken, hopeless, and vindictive is an accurate description. My former therapist's husband blew all of their savings, messed up all the patient records and billing, then hanged himself in their house. Just ruined everything he could possibly ruin. My uncle was a sergeant and had to be called several times out to a house for domestic abuse. This older guy had some young 18-year-old he would pay for the guy to swallow certain objects like paper clips and human hair. The kid would poop it out into a bag and the older guy would sift through the feces like a goddamn treasure hunt for the items. He would then put them in an envelope and file them. This one may win as creepy. I think weird as frick suits it more. Reminds me of a story I heard at work, which I guess I'll share even though I'm not a cop. I build websites for a living and one of our customers runs this high-class escort service. At one point one of his girls was invited to come to this rich middle-aged guy's chateau somewhere in Belgium. She got paid up front to spend the entire night with him. And we're talking $400 an hour here, plus expenses. You'd think the guy had some epic sex planned considering what he paid, but no. He gave her a large bottle of water and instructed her to pee in any corner of the chateau she liked. He then spent the entire morning sniffing around, trying to find where she had peed. By the time she left, that was literally all he had gotten for his thousands of dollars. Hi, pay me thousands of dollars and I too will happily pee somewhere in your house. Not a cop myself, but my dad is, and I asked him this one time. He told me it was when he went to this one house, because a woman had called and said that men were breaking into the house. He gets there and he said it was immediately very clear that the woman was not exactly altogether mentally. He said she kept mumbling things and was very jumpy and skittish. Not to mention that every single wall of her house apparently had at least 6 or 7 crosses on it, if not more. He calms her down, checks around the house for any signs of entry or just anything weird, and there's absolutely nothing that would indicate that anyone had been trying to or had been successful in breaking in. He said she followed him around the entire time and would point to things, like a doorknob or window latches, and say, "Oh, that's not where I left it." That's how they got in. He said the whole thing was fairly eerie, considering he was at this woman's house in the middle of the night. surrounded by crosses and listening to her mumble on about random shit. To make her feel better, he did a sweep of the whole house to see if there was anyone else inside, which there wasn't. He said the one thing that made it creepy for him was the fact that every few minutes she'd say something like, "Oh, they're here again," or "He's right behind us. I can feel it." Sounds like schizophrenia to me. Not a cop, but a correctional officer in Texas. One time a guy slit the forearm side of his elbows, where it bends. He laid there in a big puddle of his own blood. I was one of the responders that day. I'll never forget it. As soon as you entered the cell, the smell just hit you. Blood has a strong metallic smell, which I never realized before. He'd been laying there a while, so the blood had coagulated, which again, I did not expect. As we lifted the barely conscious guy out of the blood fell off his body in chunks, like jello. It was pretty disturbing, because I didn't expect any of it, nor was I able to mentally prepare for it. We're not really medically trained, so all of it was completely surprising to me. Goddamn, that sounds weird as frick. I didn't know blood did that either. First big car wreck I worked as an EMT. The senior medic gave me the duty of mopping out the ambulance. Blood coagulation is a strange thing. It reminded me of hair like jello. Very strange. The first time a chunk of coagulated blood fell off a patient, it reminded me of canned cranberries at Thanksgiving. Couldn't eat at Thanksgiving a few months later, because it just all came back. This surprised me when I turned 12. I don't know about other girls and maybe TMI, but it's something I see almost monthly, if you know what I mean. My father-in-law is sitting beside me, so I asked him. He is a retired sheriff and was a deputy before that. He was the first responder to an accident. A truckload of farm workers were coming back from the fields. The truck went over a hump in an intersection and a little girl in the back of the truck flew out and landed headfirst on the pavement. My Phil held her as she moaned and eventually died in his arms. He says he still hears her sounds in his head all these years later. Oh God. This reminds me of my uncle's story. He dealt with traffic accidents, and one time he was called out to this one accident where a convertible had flipped over and slid. The mental image haunts me to this day. My only major car accident involved sliding 200 feet on the roof of my car. Even now, 7 years later, not to the day, but to the weekend anyway, I occasionally look at a convertible and have a minor anxiety attack. I'm a big fan of roll bars, roofs, seat belts, and a really nice steel frame. I believe US law currently dictates that all car roofs have to be strong enough to support their own weight, possibly more. So modern cars are much safer in rollover accidents. Just thought you'd like to know that. Got a call that someone wasn't answering their phone or the doorbell. We got to the house and noticed that every window was blinded by either curtains or pieces of paper. We rang the doorbell and yelled through the letterbox, but there was no answer. We opened the door and got inside. In the house it looked like someone just had lunch. There was bread on the table and juice or milk in the glasses. Children's toys scattered all around. Then I saw a note that gave me the chills. It was a suicide note, as the door was locked from the inside. The person had to be in the house. We checked room by room and my heartbeat was at 300% when I checked the bathroom. Preparing myself for slit wrists or throats, I opened the door slowly, but there was nothing. Finally, one more room left, which was the attic. We walked slowly up the stairs and we found the resident there, hanging from a beam. I will never forget the adrenaline I had. The scene in the living room or the resident I found. I was a resident director at a student dorm and we'd get calls from helicopter moms that hadn't heard from their child in 3 days, so I'd occasionally have to do wellness checks. I was never really concerned, because kids are too busy getting stoned, shagging, studying, and drinking to call mom every night. But I had one call that I was prepared to see something ugly. It was for a resident I knew pretty well who was always a bit down, who didn't really have any friends, and gave off a weird vibe. But I knew she was close to her parents and walked around calling them a lot. Keying into her room, I was ready to see her in the tub or with a belt around her neck or a spilled pill bottle somewhere. Nope. She was shacked in with a new freak buddy and they'd turned the dorm into one large fort complete with rooms and video game lounge and had been too busy shagging and smoking dope to remember to call mom. She hadn't heard me knocking over their noise making and both were quite upset I'd barged in. That was a good day. We responded to a burglary alarm at a mortuary and found that one of the rear doors was left open. Policy now dictates that the entire building needs to be cleared search to confirm that it was a false alarm, which most are. It's the middle of the night and totally dark. We use flashlights and never turn on lights. We walk into one of the rooms and see a body on a table. It appeared that it was waiting to be processed, possibly embalmed by the mortician. It smelled like a mildly decomposing body. Suddenly I see a shadow to my right and I shine my light there and find nothing out of the ordinary. I immediately smell a really strong whiff of perfume blow by me. The search was completed more expeditiously than normal after that. Nothing was found. Now I'm not a mortician or anything, but I feel like it's kind of weird to just leave a body out overnight. Was there ever some kind of follow-up? It's not odd. Bodies don't decompose 4 to 3 days at room temp. They can be stored in the fridge for about a month. Freezer long-term. In cold climates, the ground freezes and they hold them until it thaws for the actual burial if there's not a religious issue. I'm not a funeral director, but I work at a funeral home. What do you do? Oh, I work at a funeral home. Cool. So what do you do there? Oh, I'm just a serial killer. You know how it is. Just trying to make ends meet. Job security. That guy's got upper management written all over him. From my post 8 months ago, got a call for a missing child. Got to the home to find the mother highly distressed and not sure what to do. I called in everyone to first search the home and property. I decided to search the backyard since it was a large wooded lot with no visible fence. After about 10 minutes I found the boy. He was caught on an old chain link fence in the woods that was blocked by a bunch of trees, so you couldn't see it from the house. He had basically gotten strangled to death on the fence. He must have been climbing on it, fell, and got his hooded sweatshirt caught on it. The worst part for me was having to call it in on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radio. The worst part for me was having to call it in on the radio, knowing the mother might hear it inside from one of the other officers' radio. I was in search and rescue and we had the same sort of issue. There is often family around the search site. We had a policy that you say you found a red shoe, which meant that we were to switch to an alternative channel, which we were not licensed for so that the news could not listen in. And the COs were supposed to move away from any family members. Maybe worth setting up something similar in your area. Our policy was to switch to mobile phones. Search and rescue is very often in areas that don't have cell coverage. What if you actually found a red shoe of a missing lady? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please smash the like button and leave a comment which story you liked the most. Subscribe and hit the bell notification for updates on our latest videos. And don't forget to check the links in the description box for more awesome content.